This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granic Allen. Communism claimed the lives of an estimated 100 million people in the 20th century. Millions more were imprisoned, tortured, starved, or forced to flee their homelands. For countless Canadians who themselves or their families escaped communist regimes, those atrocities aren't ancient history. They're deeply personal. And that's why the memorial to the victims of communism was created, to ensure these victims are remembered and that the crimes of communist regimes are never forgotten. Yet, instead of simply being a place of remembrance, the memorial has now become the focus of fierce political controversy. Its organizers say that the project has been the target of repeated attacks, and now Tribute to Liberty chair Ludwik Klimkowski says he's received death threats over his work to see the memorial completed. What does it say about Canada that a monument honoring victims of one of history's deadliest ideologies has itself become so controversial? And why has this project generated such intense opposition? Well, joining me now is Ludwik Klimkowski himself, who's chair of Tribute to Liberty. Ludwik, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time, and this is not going to be an easy episode because, as many of our viewers know, my father himself escaped a murderous communist regime known as Yugoslavia, and I am one of tens of millions or millions of diaspora here in Canada of various communist survivors. So let's start with the controversy or the memorial itself. Remind our viewers, why is this memorial so important?
So if you permit me, Tanya, I have volunteered for this project for about 14 years now. And I love being volunteer. I volunteer on different fronts, and I always felt that because the generosity of Canada was extended to me and my family, I have this moral obligation of giving back to my beautiful adopted homeland. And I think just recently we crossed the Rubicon because of those personal threats that we are receiving, just like you mentioned. I'm not the only one on the Tribute to Liberty board. Our renowned colleague Marcus Kolga is receiving death threats almost daily.
Wow.
He actually developed a relationship with not only RCMP, York Police Department, but other departments to push back and basically to, I don't know, educate those who are perhaps doing this without knowing the consequences. But to answer your question, Tanya, the controversy related to this project has been with us since the get-go. I think we have a large number of individuals within Canadian academia, within Canadian politics, some of the members of the social movements. They just don't like the premise, the idea that Canada is a home to about 8 to 9 million refugees that came from communism oppressed countries. And they didn't like the idea that in the heart of our city, in the heart of our capital, in the heart of our country, we will put up a rather large memorial, which you can see behind me, that represents that mutual memory, members of yours, mine, and people from across the globe. There's also a large group of people that don't recognize that communism has not ended, that in fact, it does exist in a number of Asian countries. It does exist just south of us in Cuba. And frankly, this is why we felt that we need this common memory, common ground of memory, place that we can unite and commemorate, and frankly, to celebrate the victory of ours over the oppressors of communism.
Because these are survivors, right? I mean, of course, the memorial's for the victims, but those who are erecting the memorial have survived. And so in some ways, I'm actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, look, if you were to ask your dad, obviously he's gone now, but he himself, by the virtue of having to move from Yugoslavia to Canada, he was a victim too.
It's from
Croatia, sorry, yeah, obviously, right? But so the idea is that anyone who needed to find a place of refuge, to find a safety harbor within Canada, is a victim to a certain extent.
No, absolutely. And I want to talk about this when we get into our next segment, because we're coming up to a commercial break. But for me, in one hand, I am shocked and surprised that there has been any kind of opposition to this, let alone the scale, which includes obviously death threats. Shocking, especially here in Canada. One would hope that that would never happen. But on the other hand, you've seen this rise of communist sympathizers and Marxists in Canada. So on the other hand, I'm not super surprised. But we're going to delve into that when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back to Counterpoint. We're discussing the Tribute to Liberty Victims of Communism Memorial that is erected in Ottawa that represents millions and millions of Canadians who trace maybe even just one generation or they themselves back to escaping or fleeing communist regimes. And joining me to have this discussion is the chair of Tribute to Liberty, Ludwik Klimkowski. Ludwik, okay, so I shouldn't be surprised, but this has become a tribute to the victims of communism has become very politically divisive because I guess there are people who have communist sympathies in this country. But, your response is that, we are remembering the victims of these totalitarian, these dictatorial regimes. This shouldn't be a partisan issue, truly. Why do you think, the question is why? Why is this so divisive? Why is this happening in Canada?
Look, it is happening in Canada because of interference of foreign forces. Just the latest article published by New York-based magazine called Jacobin. There's this hit piece written by, I wouldn't call him a journalist, but a fellow who basically slanders me and the memorial. But because no one in Canada wanted to publish his piece, he actually went down to the far left, like Antifa-like left publication source in New York, and he's blasting this all over. So we moved from a political debate and sometimes divisive because people are stigmatizing the memorial and they are making the conversation between capitalism and socialism and communism without realizing that we are not the part of the political debate.
No.
We are the refugees here who want to remember and who want to educate our other Canadians about what happened to us. But this smear campaign perpetrated by both of them, I think we are getting to the final stages before we launch some kind of a legal action, because what they say is just not only far from the truth, but it's also it just spreads hate. It enables those individuals who they move from not liking the memorial to actually ostracizing and stigmatizing individuals who volunteered many years to see the establishment of that memorial.
Which is really it's devastating. It's sad because again, people on your board either themselves are survivors of communism or their parents. They're usually just one generation removed. It's quite shocking and disgusting.
Tanya, I'll give you one tangible example.
Please.
Okay, we are being stigmatized with the Nazi sympathizer slogan. Okay, which is kind of it's the phrase of du jour among the far left, both in the United States and Canada. But those who are perpetrating that nonsense don't even know that one of the members of our board is Jewish. I grew up in city of Warsaw in Poland, where my grandfather was executed by Nazis. He was murdered. Some of the most prominent contributors to this memorial are Jews, Canadian Jewish professionals. That half of the people who are to be commemorated on the wall of remembrance that you see behind me, they do have some kind of Nazi connections, is a absolute nonsense. You see, really people who died many years ago just simply did not use the internet. The internet did not exist. You cannot find the footprint again about that person. And the assumption is that because you cannot find any information about them, that information must be hidden. They must be some kind of in some way related to Nazis.
Wow. Okay, that's really shocking. I mean, a lot of people were just peasants who were massacred. I mean, I know, again, with my ancestors coming from Croatia, which was swallowed up by Marxist Yugoslavia, I mean, there was a ridiculous quantity of mass graves of tens and hundreds of thousands all over. It's ridiculous. Why do you think, I mean, we've seen a rise of anti-Semitic crime. Like, why is like this hatred, like, and now again against your memorial? Like, what's going on? We only have about 15 seconds, but what's going on?
I think we are living in times of change. And because the European oppression of communism has ended by the late 1980s, the younger generations, they just don't remember this. They don't know it, right?
Okay, we're going to come back to this and see how we can remedy that in just a moment. Welcome back to Counterpoint. We're discussing the Tribute to Liberty Victims of Communism Memorial that is erected in Ottawa. And joining me to have this discussion is the Chair of Tribute to Liberty, Ludwik Klimkowski. Ludwik, thank you again for joining me. It's both shocking and sad that there is such a controversy for this memorial because, I mean, a lot of these people were slaughtered. Some people are never found, dumped in mass graves, and then a lot of people had to flee, like my own father, from these regimes because it was like starve or leave, which is a form of ethnic cleansing in its own way. But anyhow, you mentioned something before we went to commercial break, which is that people forget and young people seem to not understand what communism is. And they're almost embracing these socialist and communistic slogans. There are young people who don't know what the Holocaust was. They just have no knowledge of it. And I mean, is this a fault of the curriculum? Is it because things have become demonized in society? Like, why is this happening and how do we counter and remedy that?
One word, complacency.
Hmm.
Just simply, look, the idea of socialism and to a certain extent notions related to it, it is perceived by some people, especially those who quote Karl Marx, as noble. But the idea shared by Karl Marx has not been properly explained by our academia. And the ideas that he wanted to spread led exactly to what you mentioned. So I'm assuming there must be a significant group of Canadians for whom this memorial feels like a poke in the eye, that basically we, the united group of different ethnic communities, we are saying, listen to us, look at our story, look what we have and our ancestors went through, and please don't do this to us, because we came to this country to live in peace and prosperity with our neighbors. We don't want the repetition of what we have experienced under communism oppressed countries. And for those individuals, perhaps that's a notion that it's really difficult to accept.
Yeah, and I don't know if because maybe there's like a lack of familiarity, but why don't you share with us some of the countries or ethnicities represented in the names or the donors and or on the board for this memorial?
So imagine this. Had the audacity of including the Vietnamese Canadian community in one of his latest publications, saying that our Heritage Canada ministry, one of the most important ministers of our government, purposely excluded the Vietnamese from being commemorated because there's too much of unknown related to their activities. And there's also another notion, which is Vietnam is reemerging as one of the tigers of Asian economies. And there's this group of individuals within our global affairs who doesn't want to jeopardize that potential tie to them. We obviously know rather controversial notion of how we have reignited the relationship with the communist China, given the United States situation. So all of that is basically narrowing down to the discussion about is socialism really just a stepping stone to communism? And if it is, well, there are many Canadian socialists, and obviously we are for plurality of different views and opinions in Canada, but they feel threatened. They feel threatened about the notion that this memorial actually has a human story attached to it. That in fact there is a mosaic of names that was supposed to serve as a pilgrimage place for many Canadian families like yours and mine.
Right. Now, those names, there has been a decision, right, not to post the names, or it's temporarily been put on hold. Why was that done?
So to have the Minister of Canadian Heritage who takes the responsibility of that final decision, and as a result of that excludes, basically castrates the green bottom line, from the bottom up story of Canadians. We wanted to be on that wall where everyone, regardless if you're Korean or Chinese or Cuban or Polish or Croatian, that we can come together as Canadians. And the government said, too much risk. And you know why they said it? Because they invited Ukrainian Nazi soldier. His name was Humka, and he was celebrated in our Canadian Parliament with the president of Ukraine.
Right. And that was under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Anyhow, we have to cut to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Counterpoint. We're wrapping up our discussion with Ludwik Klimkowski, who's the chair of Tribute to Liberty, an organization that has worked with the government, the federal government of Canada, to erect a monument commemorating the victims of communism. Shouldn't be controversial, but my gosh, has it caused a lot of political fuss. And in this case, Ludwik, you've received death threats. Like, could you just give us in a sentence or so, like what are people telling you? What kind of threats are you getting?
Just recently I got the email from someone, and it's funny because his name and the email address is on it. He says that I should commit a suicide myself so I can spare an effort of killing me by the others.
Wow. I am so sorry. That is awful. That is shocking and awful. And again,
yeah,
go ahead.
But that keeps me going. That keeps me going. That is, look, if I deal with this kind of a misinformation and this kind of a lack of tolerance, that means that building a memorial is just the first step. We need to go beyond that and educate our fellow Canadians about how evil and how horrible that system was and is.
Absolutely. And, having a memorial is not unusual in Canada. I mean, we have memorials around the country commemorating, victims of the Holocaust, of genocides, terrorisms, other war, soldiers dead in wars. And again, like, why is it equally important then to have one honoring the victims of communism?
I think the wisdom of this country was to recognize that within the 20th century, there were two main events that in the human history can be described as just pure evil. And one of them was Holocaust, and another one is the story of communism ever since the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. So, because Ottawa is home to, as you mentioned, multiple national memorials, we were in the lockstep with the Holocaust Memorial. The government of the day decided that obviously the Jewish population in Canada is relatively small, but Holocaust as that idea that needs to be educated about and kept in our memory was equally important as the victims of communism who found refuge in Canada. That's why the government decided to build both. Mm-hmm. And Holocaust obviously is receiving even worse treatment, including the painting and the swastikas on it, and I just don't envy them. But that tells you that both memorials are a good stepping stone and a tool for education of our fellow Canadians.
And again, seeing this kind of violence against, death threats, obviously, and verbal threats, and then the vandalism. I mean, again, a lot of these Canadians, yes, the ones who survived the Holocaust or have family who died in the Holocaust or who escaped from Eastern Europe or China or Cuba or Vietnam or elsewhere. I mean, these horrors are really raw and real. I mean, you've heard horror stories of what people had to do to escape or how some didn't escape.
Right. But you know what? There's always this magnificent moment within it. I vividly remember the day. And as you can imagine, Ottawa gets really, really cold in the wintertime, and we get lots of snow for months and months and months. So from about December till March, maybe sometimes even April, that memorial that you see behind me is not accessible. It is full of snow, and the snow can be potentially up to your knees. But one day, with that snow, with plenty of it, we found someone left Archipelago Gulag book by Solzhenitsyn on the top of that granite wall that you see behind me. And there was a little note that went with it that basically said that whoever left that, there was no information who did that such a thing, that they left it so others can pick it up and learn from the story of our fellow citizens, that that we don't want archipelago gulags in Canada. We don't
No.
want people to be in concentration camps because they quest for speaking freely. We don't want people to be imprisoned because they don't like what the government does, the government of the day. We don't want anyone to have their bank accounts locked up because of social activism. We don't want anyone to be killed or to be terrorized, including their own family, for different type of view, for the opinion that disagrees with you. We need to come together again and be the strong nation of true North, just like we used to be. And that memorial, I hope, leads that way.
Okay, Ludwik, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, and best wishes. And I'm sorry that you've received such death threats and hate. And I'm glad to hear you're keeping at it. Thank you. Thanks for watching.